And I am thrilled to be a part of the A2D radio platform family. And the gist of the show is, and this is, I've been wanting to do something like this for a very long time. It's going to be kind of a hybrid and a combination of things, but really the gist of the show that we're going to do for you each and every week is a sit down with people I really admire in the business. And that could take a lot of different forms. It could be somebody in the sports business. It could be somebody in the news business, whether locally or nationally. Could be someone in the comedy realm, whatever it is. But I want to sit down and learn their journey, learn what makes them tick, find out how they got to where they got to. I just think the background and the journey is the most fascinating part. It really is, for me at least. You know, you see sort of the finished product and what these people are doing now and what they're maybe well known for, but you don't know what it took to get to that point. And to me, not only is it interesting, it also could be really inspiring for people who are maybe out there trying to figure out what to do with their lives. If they're struggling a little bit in their career path, they've had a lot of ups and downs, maybe more downs than ups. I think there's great lessons to be learned in perseverance and stick-to-itiveness that a lot of our guests that we're going to be talking with have gone through to get to where they got to. It didn't just happen overnight for a lot of these folks. And we got a lot of fun people to talk to. So while I'm thinking about who I want to do the very first show with, I thought there's nobody better than a Hall of Famer from someone who's got a very diverse background in terms of the business that he's in, who's always been willing to make changes, to kind of go maybe the road less traveled. And it's really worked out well for him on a million different levels. And the person I'm talking about, and I'm going to bring on right now, is the one and only Ray Didinger. Ray, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Always good to see you, Rob. How are you doing?
Ray, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I'm sure you just heard the build up there, the intro, and it was just like you wrote it. No, I'm kidding. But no, it was, I think you are a great example of this because people see, all right, there's Ray Didinger, the guy I hear on the radio, or I see on TV, or he's a playwright and he's got books and all these other things. And they think, you were that guy, from birth, you were that same person, right? But it takes a lot to get to that point. So let's kind of walk through it a little bit. And you're a guy, and the background is fascinating. Like, you can see the seeds in a lot of ways that were planted from childhood, but also it's sort of the journey to get there. So I want to start with this. You're a guy, you grew up in Delaware County, but you had great influence in Southwest Philly with your grandparents and your parents and your grandfather's bar. And that, I think, sowed a lot of the seeds for you for being a sports fan and an Eagles fan. So let's start there. Take me back to those days when you'd be in there having a soda pop and just kind of listening to the guys yelling and screaming about the Eagles in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, you pretty much described it. I mean, that was my childhood. We lived, my parents and I was an only child, and we lived in a little apartment that was right on Woodland Avenue in Southwest Philly. And my grandfather owned a bar one block further down Woodland Avenue. And, there was no place to play. There were no parks. There was none of that stuff. So as a kid, I grew up in my grandfather's bar, just helping him out, helping him clean up. But more than anything else, just sitting at the end of the bar, listening to him and his customers just talk sports and, watching the little black and white, watching games on the little black and white TV over the bar. That was my upbringing. And I think that what it taught me was just sitting there listening to these guys, and they were all, blue collar guys from the neighborhood. Most of them worked at GE, or some of them worked at Westinghouse, but, they were all working men. A lot of them were, vets back from WW2. And, they were hardworking guys every day, but the thing that really kept them going, the thing that really energized them was sports. And talking about last night's Phillies game or last Sunday's Eagles game. It was the one thing that they all had in common. It was the one thing that kind of fueled them and kept them going. And what it taught me as a kid was, these are games, but they're more than just games. I mean, it's, for the people that say, oh, sports is it's just trivial, it doesn't really matter. If you grew up in that environment, you saw that to this whole group of people in that part of the city, it did matter. It mattered a lot. And, in a lot of ways, they defined themselves by how good the Phillies were on a given year, or how good the Eagles were, or how last night's game went. That was really the kind of stuff that kept them going. So from a very young age, I developed an appreciation that this is important stuff, and it's a big part of people's lives. And it was something that, I was going to play and I was going to do my stuff, but I realized that beyond that, this was something that had a real significant place in our society and in our culture.
Yeah, Ray, I'm with you. Like, I get where it can maybe go overboard sometimes, the fandom. We've seen examples of it. But I think what people who sort of poo-poo it don't understand is it's an escape. Those guys who were working at Westinghouse and GE and busting it all day, they just wanted a couple hours where they could just get away from that, from all the hard work and maybe some tough stuff that's going on at home or whatever the case may be. And if that game for 2 or 3 hours, or sitting there talking to your buddies, or reading a great story, from a great beat writer or columnist like you, gives you a little bit of an escape, then it is very important. It's like, I feel the same way. If you can escape and go watch a great movie or go to a great play, that's mental health wise, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, it used to annoy me when I did get into the business, when I got into the newspaper business, and I started in news, but I always wanted to get to sports, and I did. And when I got to sports and I was writing sports, to the interaction you sometimes had with people on, as we call, news side, and how sometimes you got the feeling that they kind of looked down at the sports department, and they used to get referred to as, oh, you work in the toy department. Like you aren't really a serious journalist. You aren't really a serious newsman if you're not covering news, if you're just covering sports, because after all, they're just games. And I think that what's lost on them is, no, they're a lot more than that, and how many things, Lord knows, in this world that we live in today, how many things out there that really have the capacity to pull people together, right, and unite people. And we all live in a society. You're in it. I'm in it. We're all in it. You walk down the street, everybody's wearing headphones. Everybody's looking at their cell phone. People text instead of having conversations. There are very few things that bring us all together and unite us, and and make us actually nudge the guy next to us and say, "Do you see that? You see that?" Well, games do that. Sports do that. An Eagles Sunday does that. In my lifetime, I can't think of anything that united this city any more than the Eagles and Super Bowl 52, that just had people just of all races, all ages, all genders, all out in the streets celebrating something. Well, you know what? It was a game, but it was a hell of a lot more than a game. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes that needs to be recognized. And I was lucky enough that the way I grew up, I recognized it from an early age.
Right. So, all right. So eventually you move out to Delaware County. Not that it was all that far from where you were in Southwest Philly, but you go out to Delaware County, Ridley Park area. Was there a time, I'm going back to grade school here, Ray. This is how far back we go. All right.
Right.
Was there an epiphany? Obviously you had the sports background and you knew, hey, this is important to people, especially in the city. But was there an epiphany? Was there a teacher? Was there a moment for you where you said, I might want to write about this? Or did that not happen until a little bit later?
No, real specific. 5th grade, Our Lady of Peace Grammar School in Millmont Park. I had a nun. Her name was Sister Claire Ursula, and she assigned us all. And one day in class, she had the class. I want you to all write an essay, and the topic was the person you most admire. And 5th grade. I mean, okay, like everybody else, I just wrote an essay and turned it in. And the next day she came back in class and she had all the papers graded. And she said, before I pass these out, I want to read one particular essay that was written by one of your classmates. And she reads it aloud in class. And lo and behold, it was mine. And she got to the end and she said, this essay was written by Raymond Didinger. And she said to me, she said, Mr. Didinger, you should be a writer. And Honestly, I mean, that was like really a wow moment, because it was the first time in my life that anybody ever told me I was good at something. And from that point on, I mean, look, I can't say that set the course for everything that happened, but it got me thinking about it,
Mhm.
and it, listen, if your fifth grade nun tells you this is what you're supposed to be and you're a fifth grader, you kind of believe it. And so from that point on, every time I wrote something in class or I took a little extra time to make it as good as I could make it. And one thing kind of led to another. By the time I got to high school, I was really serious about journalism and a career in journalism. And then I went to Temple University and studied journalism and communications. And when I got out, by the time I was halfway through college, there was no question that's what I wanted to do.
All right. Before we get to college graduation and the career, I got to go back to 1964. Because I know there was almost not a Ray Didinger career as a writer, playwright, broadcaster, etc. The Phillies collapsed in 64, Ray, for some of our younger folks. They had a big lead, and it was one of the epic meltdowns we've ever seen in the history of Philadelphia sports, or sports for that matter. You're a freshman at Temple, okay? This had a pretty big influence on you because things almost went really sideways for you because of the Philadelphia Phillies. Share a little bit of that.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it was real. I mean, this isn't a joke. I mean, it's not like a funny little story I like to tell. No, it really happened. I mean, it was, and I think you really kind of had to live through it to understand what it was like. But in 1964, fall of 1964 was when I enrolled at Temple. And that's just a big adjustment in and of itself, going from high school to college, going from an all boys Catholic high school to a co-ed campus where you actually have girls in class with you. I mean, there's a lot of adjusting that has to go on. But right at that time, September of 1964, when I first rode the Broad Street subway up to Temple, when I just began enrolling in class, was exactly the moment when the bottom fell out of the Phillies season. And it was a season that, as a lifelong Phillies fan, that had been just so wonderful and so great. I had never seen the Phillies in my lifetime be any good at all. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, 1964, all of these magical things start to happen. Dick Allen's Rookie of the Year, Jim Bunning, perfect game, Johnny Callison, walk-off home run, wins the All-Star game. I mean, everything's all these things are happening. And you finally get to the point of oh my God, the Phillies are actually going to go to the World Series this year. And you got to September, and at that point, you're fully on board with this. You really think it's finally going to happen. And right at the moment when I get to Temple is exactly the moment that the bottom falls out of the whole thing, and the Phillies lose 10 in a row and blow the pennant. And I just became a total zombie. I couldn't think of anything else. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. And I had a terrible first semester at Temple. I mean, to the point where at the end of that semester, I was on academic probation. I mean, I was one more bad semester from being in the draft and being on my way to Kay-San.
Whoa.
And it took me, and finally I at the end of the semester, my family couldn't believe it, because I had always been a good student. And I said, listen, what I told my father when he had my transcript, I said, Dad, it's all Gene Mock's fault.
I'm sure that went over well with Mr. Didinger.
Yeah, he didn't. He did not see the humor in that.
Yeah.
But that's really true. Now, spring semester comes around, and I realized, hey, I got to get it together here. Mm-hmm. And I did, and I kind of got back on track, and I did finish up there, and I went on about my career. Yeah. But the timing of that, just starting college right at the moment when the Phillies had the most epic collapse in baseball history. It devastated me, but it devastated a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, it was good training for you to be heartbroken and misery in Philadelphia sports. That's for sure. So you graduate from Temple, Ray, and are you immediately looking for sports writing gigs? And do you land one right away? What's the journey there once, post Temple and graduation?
Yeah, when I graduated, there was no question that's where I was going. The hard part, and this is true for anybody, is getting that first job.
Yeah.
You get out of college, and now you got to go out in that big bad world and just find a place to get started. And the Delaware County Daily Times, our neighborhood paper, you and me both being Delco guys. I went there first and talked to the editor and brought some of my writing samples. And he said, yeah, he said, I like what I see. He said, but we don't have any openings in sports. He said, we only have a 3-man sports department and we don't have the money to hire a 4th. He said, but it just so happens we're looking for a news reporter. And so I said, okay. I mean, it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but okay, if that's what you got, that's what I'll take. So I did. I took the job on news side and went there and spent 1 year at the Delco Times covering, transit strikes and school board meetings and bake sales and all the other stuff that was happening in Delco. And the other thing that was happening out there that I had to do a lot of, which was probably the toughest thing I've ever done in the business, and I had to do it right away, was 1968. This was 1968. And that was at the absolute height of the Vietnam War. I mean, there were Delco kids dying in Vietnam all the time. And every time a Delco kid died in Vietnam, the paper had to send a reporter out to the house to interview the parents, to do a story about it. And, we all took turns. I mean, it was no one person was asked to do all of it,
right?
But we shared it around. And so I wrote a lot of those. I knocked on a lot of doors and wrote a lot of those stories. And honestly, it's still to this day probably the toughest assignment I ever had in journalism.
Yeah, I could see that. That's for sure. And by the way, thanks to everybody in the chat welcoming us and excited about the show. I am very much excited. That's for sure. And what a great way to kick it off with Ray Didinger. All right, Ray. So you make your way. Hey, thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate it. You make your way from the Delco Times to the Bulletin, and correct me if I'm not getting the timeline right, but
you got it.
Yeah, you get your, what would you consider that's a big break. I mean, that's the big time newspaper that obviously the Daily News and the Inquirer, et cetera, but that's a big time move to make that move. Are you hired there to be the Eagles beat that year that you get the gig? So what's your gig with the Bulletin when you make that move?
No, the Bulletin hired me to cover high schools.
Okay.
They covered me it was a sports department. And I had worked when I was a senior at Temple, I worked as a clerk in the Bulletin sports department. So the sports editor knew me.
All right.
And my goal was to get a job at the Bulletin right away. I mean, it was the biggest newspaper in the city. It was the newspaper I read as a kid. I mean, to me, that was my goal. Mm-hmm. And he said at the time, and he was right. He said, you're not ready for the Bulletin right now. You need to go to a smaller paper, get some experience, but I'll be calling you. And after 1 year at the Delco Times, sure enough, he called me and said, our high school, the guy who's covering high school sports for us is retiring, Jack Ryan, who had covered high school sports for the Bulletin for like 40 years.
He was a Ted Solari before his time.
Yeah. He was Ted Solari before Ted Solari. Exactly right. And he was retiring and they needed a new high school writer. So Jack called me and asked me if I would come. And I did. I mean, what a thrill. I mean, to walk into the Bulletin and, man, you're in the big leagues. I mean, at that time, it was the biggest afternoon newspaper in America. The daily circulation was bigger than any newspaper in America. And the watchwords, and they were actually painted on the side of the building. In Philadelphia, nearly everybody reads the Bulletin was the slogan. And it was true. I mean, the Bulletin was that big. And there I was, just 1 year out of Temple working in that sports department.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really great. And I spent 1 year covering high schools. And then at the end of that year, the gentleman who was covering the Eagles, a guy named Hugh Brown, and he had covered the Eagles all the way back to Steve Van Buren. Well, he came up to retirement age. And so Jack Wilson, the sports editor, said to me, I'm moving you up to the Eagles beat, which was quite a jump from covering high school.
How old are you? Like 25?
23.
Jeez. 23
and just 2 years out of Temple. And I was the youngest. I was by far the youngest beat man in the NFL that year, 23. And the other guys in the city and my direct competition from the other papers, the Inquirer, the Daily News, and all the suburban papers. I mean, they were all veteran guys, have been covering the team for a long time, and really good, and real well connected, had sources, knew the agents, knew the people at the league office. Gordon Forbes was covering for the Inquirer. He had Pete Rozelle's home phone number, for God's sakes. So this was my competition. And it was, they definitely threw me in the deep end of the pool. And it was just a matter of whether I was going to learn how to swim or not. And but I loved, the Eagles were my favorite team. Pro football was my favorite sport. And here I was. I had the opportunity to cover that at the age of 23. So I recognized that it was a great challenge, but it was also a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah. Well, all right. That's a good tee up point here, Ray. So we're going to step aside real quick. And when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit further. We're going to talk about the Vermeil years. We're going to get into your ability, I think, even if it wasn't as calculated, to always see a couple of steps ahead in the business, because you always seem to zig when it was, or zag when it was time, and you always made the right move. So we'll get into that, how you get to the point where you're playwright. And we got to dive into the Eagles, Ray, not only Super Bowl 52, but last season, Super Bowl 52. And I want to ask you about this year, because I think they may have a worse record, but I don't know if that necessarily translates into them being a worse team. So we'll do that. We'll get your thoughts on the Phillies, on the Flyers' big move with Keith Jones, the Eagles. There's a ton more in store, that's for sure, and a lot of ground that we have to cover. So don't go anywhere. You are watching the Rob Ellis Show with the man himself, the Hall of Famer, Ray Didinger. Right back.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All right, Ray, welcome back, everybody. This is the Rob Ellis Show. That's Ray Didinger. I am Rob Ellis. Yes, so we're going to be coming to you each and every week. I get to sit down with some of my favorite people in the business and learn about them and their career journey and how they got here. Let me throw this at you, Ray, and we'll dive a little bit more heavily into it, but I want you to sort of ponder this right now, the question that we're going to be asking. So the 2023 Eagles season, I think we're probably, in my opinion, looking at 11, 12 wins as opposed to 14-3 last year for a number of reasons. Defensive turnover, counting on inexperienced players, et cetera. Would you agree or disagree with that a lesser record doesn't necessarily make them a lesser team this year?
No, I think you're exactly right. I would be, it's not out of the question, but I mean, I'd be very surprised if they duplicated 14-3. It's very hard to do. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to be a good team, but I think it's going to be a greater struggle. Because if you look back at last year, and we kind of said that going into the season, that they had some real schedule breaks. I mean, the schedule was very favorable for them last year. It was. It just was. I mean, how many really, really top-ranked quarterbacks did they face?
Yeah.
Not that many.
Very few.
And so and the schedule laid out in a way that it gave them a chance. There were a lot of easy games early, so it gave them a chance to come out of the gate strong and get on a big run and really just kind of get everything rolling, which they did. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, last year it was kind of set up for them to do that. And listen, they took full advantage, and Jalen Hurts had a fantastic year, and good for them. Give them credit for it. But it was a much easier journey than the one they're going to face this year. Mm-hmm. And you knew it. I mean, you knew as a Super Bowl team you were going to have a really tough schedule. It was going to be one of those weird schedules with, Thursdays and Mondays and Sunday nights and short weeks and long weeks. And, hardly like a month ago, I made a bet with somebody. I said, how many 1 o'clock Sunday kickoffs do you think this team is going to have next year? Yeah, give me an over under. Mm-hmm. 17 games. How many Sunday 1 o'clocks do you think they're going to have? And the guy said 5. And thinking that was a low number, I said, no, I'm under. Uh-huh. And what do you what? They're not. I'm telling you, it's going to be under. Well, right now it's 3.
Yeah, and it may not even stay that way, Ray.
It may not. I mean, the final one, the final game at the Arizona game, which is here.
Yep.
Right now it's listed at 1 o'clock. I mean, probably likelihood is that's going to get flexed.
I'm telling you.
When it's all said and done, I mean, they could very well finish this year playing 2 Sunday 1:00 games, the 2 Washington games.
Yep.
That may very well be the extent of it. The
Correct.
rest of it is going to be all over the place.
All over. I agree.
And look, good for TV. I mean, that's great. And you know, if, as an Eagles fan, you like seeing your team get that kind of exposure and that kind of respect. But don't lose sight of the fact that for the coaches and players, having that kind of helter-skelter schedule, it really complicates matters.
Yeah, it does. There's no question. Coach Marcus checking in. We appreciate you. Appreciate you, Thomas. This is fun, man. We're having fun here, right? All right, so we will we'll jump back to the Birds in a second, present day. I want to move forward a little bit to 1976 when Dick Vermeil comes aboard. And you're covering the team. You're there every single day. You know what goes on when he comes in and when he makes the move from UCLA. It's 3-a-days. It's 4-a-days. It's a different animal than it is now, Ray. That's for sure. But interestingly enough, I think people assume because you guys have such a great relationship now, there's such a high realm of respect and level of respect between the two of you. You guys didn't always see eye to eye. You kind of butted heads a little bit, didn't you, during the early years with Vermeil?
First year for sure.
Mm-hmm.
First year for sure. Yeah. I was still, well, I mean, it was my 7th year covering the team as the beat guy. So I had been around and God, I mean, I had already been through how many head coaches? Jerry Williams, Eddie Kayat, Mike McCormick. I mean, I was only in my 7th year, but I was on my 4th head coach. So I had seen a lot.
Yeah.
But the one thing I hadn't seen was winning. I mean, I had 7 years that they had never been over 500. But I was young, and Vermeil was obviously a first-time NFL head coach. And, I was covering training camp, and you're right, Rob. It was, to this day, I have never seen a training camp like it. I mean, it wasn't just tough. It was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, 3.5 hour practices, morning and afternoon, full gear every day, full pads, hitting every session, late meetings into the night. I mean, it was really, really rough. And back then there were no limits to how many guys you could bring to training camp. Now there are. Yeah. Well, back then, I mean, they brought 120 guys to Widener. And it was just a matter, it was survival of the fittest, and that's, Vermeil was just going to work these guys until, September rolled around, and the guys that were still standing were the guys that were going to make the team. That's literally how he built it. So, and he invested everything in himself, physically, emotionally, everything. I mean, Vermeil was all in. And I'm covering the team, and they were not good. I mean, let's face it, they just weren't good.
He took over a terrible situation too, in fairness. No first round draft picks, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Terrible situation. The roster was stripped bare. Yeah. The previous regime had traded away all the draft picks, so they didn't even have the advantage of other bad teams of being able to rebuild through the draft. So I honestly think, I've said this before, and I think it's true, I don't think any coach in the history of the NFL took on a tougher challenge than what Vermeil did that year. I mean, that team was as down and out gets. So every day on the practice field, that's what you're seeing. I mean, you're seeing this team. It's not very good, but the coach is working them to death. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was writing. And Vermeil didn't like it, I mean, he had come from UCLA. He had come from a college background. He had coached a really good team that had just finished winning the Rose Bowl over Woody Hayes and Ohio State. So he got very favorable press coverage on the West Coast because the West Coast press was a lot softer than the East Coast press. And the fact of the matter was college football wasn't pro football. And also he had a really good team out there and he had a really bad team here. So what I was writing in the paper was a whole lot different than what he was used to reading when he was out at UCLA. And, one day at training camp, he took me aside and I could tell he was angry with me over time. But one day he finally, said after practice, I need to talk to you. And so he said, his word was, he said, you were undermining my program. Mm. And I said, I'm not sure I understand what you mean. He said, well, every day out here on the practice field in the meeting rooms, I'm working these guys and I'm trying to convince them that they can compete in the NFL. I'm trying to convince them that they can win, that they can play with the Steelers and they can play with the Cowboys and they can compete with these teams. That's what I'm trying to instill in them. That's what I'm trying to build here. He said, but then every day they pick up every night at dinner, they pick up the paper and they read your story, and all you're doing is telling them how worthless they are and how they're not getting any better and how they're still the worst team in the league. And he said, so I spend all day building these guys up, and then you knock them down. And I understood the problem, and he wasn't wrong. The thing was, he wasn't wrong. What he said was true. But what I said to him was, I said, look, Dick, you got to understand, you're doing what you have to do as a coach. I fully get that. I mean, what you're doing, that's what you have to do. But you got to understand, I'm doing what I have to do. I don't work for the Eagles. I work for the newspaper. My job is to come out here every day and write what I see. And I still remember saying this. And I said, what I see is a team that's going to be lucky to win 4 games this year. And that's so, look, you're doing your job and I'm doing my job. It just so happens that they aren't the same job.
Yeah.
And if we're going to butt heads, we're going to butt heads. But that's the way it is. And, he just, threw his hands up and said, you're going to just write what you want to write. And just stormed away.
Yeah.
And so that was the way it was most of that first year, because it was a really long, grinding, tough year. And they wound up winning 4 games. Right. I wound up calling that shot at training camp. But over time, and as the team got better and he began to build it into something pretty special, my writing obviously reflected that. Right. And so we got to the point where we could kind of actually speak to each other. And then we got to the point where we actually kind of got along. Mm-hmm. And then we got to the point where I think there was a genuine, healthy respect. And Lord knows I respected him tremendously, because even when we quarreled over those years, I fully appreciated and respected the how hard he was working to build this thing. And so I always had that. And then over time, now we're to the point where, I mean, we're great friends. And last year, when he got enshrined in the Hall of Fame in Canton, I went out to Canton. I wanted to be there and congratulate him, because, listen, I remember what it was like back in 1976. I remember what that first job was like, and the journey that he took from that practice field in Widener with that raggedy bunch that he took over to get into Canton. I mean, that was to make that journey. That was quite an accomplishment.
Let's fast forward to 1980 then, Ray. Actually, it was 81 with the NFC Championship game, but that was sort of the moment. The team had made the playoffs a couple of years, 78, 79, but 80 was really the year. It was sort of the culmination of everything. And they get there, and it's against the Cowboys. And as a Philadelphian, what that meant. If you can get past this step, you get to the Super Bowl, but it's against these guys who had owned them forever. I want you to just give me the story real quick before we get to the accomplishment of the game. The decision to wear the white jersey. So people don't know, the Cowboys felt like their white jerseys were like their good luck charm.
Right.
And the blue jerseys were sort of their kryptonite, if you will. Not that they lost a ton of games, period, during that era, unfortunately. But when they did lose, generally it was in the blue uniforms.
Right.
The way it usually worked back then was the home team wore the darker jerseys. The Eagles would have worn their green at home. Cowboys would have worn the white on the road, which would have been exactly what they wanted. But it turns out Jim Murray the general manager had a little bit of a trick up his sleeve. But you happened to be in Dallas then. So tell me that story.
Yeah, I was in Dallas. It was the week leading up to the game. The paper had sent me down there. We had a lot of writers covering the Eagles, and the Eagles were actually practicing in Tampa because the weather in Philadelphia was so brutal, and the Eagles did not have an indoor facility, that Vermeil felt correctly that the only way we're going to get decent practices in is if we go somewhere else where the weather's good. So he got the approval from Len Toes, the owner, to take the whole team down to Tampa. So they spent the week in Tampa practicing. And so the paper wanted to have somebody covering the game from the Dallas side, so they sent me to Dallas. I still remember it was Wednesday of that week, and I am literally sitting in Tex Schramm, the club president's office. Tex was a nice fellow, and he and I got along well. So we're just sitting there, we're just talking about the game. And his secretary, Suzanne Mitchell, comes walking in, and she has a Twix from the league office. And she says, Mr. Schramm, I think you would need to see this. So
it's akin to an email now, basically.
It's equivalent to an email, right? It's like a telegram.
Yep.
And so she lays it on the desk, and Tex starts reading it, and his face starts to turn the color of a tomato. And he says, he says, "Look at this." He hands it over to me. And it's a notification from the league office that, I'm paraphrasing the wording, but it said that the Philadelphia Eagles, as the host team in the championship game, are exercising their rights to wear, to pick the color jerseys. And so this Sunday, the Eagles are going to wear their white jerseys, which is a complete departure. They had worn all year at home. They had always worn the green. Yeah. But our mutual, very, very good friend, Jim Murray, who was then the general manager, thought, okay, if we wear our green at home, it's going to allow them to wear their white, which is what they would rather wear. Yeah. Well, why would we want to do that? If it's our prerogative, let's wear our whites and make them wear the blues, which they don't want to wear. Very, very smart, great gamesmanship on Jimmy's part. And Tex is up storming around his office and says, "How many times this year have the Eagles worn their white at home?" I said, "Never." He said, "So this is all about making us wear the blue." I said, "Yeah, pretty much." And then he gets all huffy and says, "Well, I'm glad that's all they have to worry about is what color jersey, blah, 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 blah." Now, we all know how the thing plays out. The Eagles win 20-7. They go to the Super Bowl. And did the jerseys have anything to do with any of that? Probably not. Yeah. But it was just in a game, given the nature of the rivalry of Eagles Cowboys and what it has always been, and it certainly was during the Landry Vermeil years, just a little bit of a psychological edge is not a bad thing. Yeah. And Jimmy's masterstroke, I still to this day think of it as that, allowed the Eagles to fire the first shot that week. And and it played out the rest of that week. And then game day, I really look back on that game. I mean, being in the stadium that day, I've been in a lot of NFL stadiums for a lot of big games. I don't think I have ever been in a stadium where I felt that there was a more profound home field advantage than the Eagles had that day. I mean, the combination of the jerseys, the bitter cold weather, which certainly favored the Eagles, and just the energy and the emotion in that building was such that I didn't think the Cowboys had a chance of winning that game. I can't ever remember walking into an Eagles game where I was more confident that the Eagles were going to win. And the Cowboys were favored. And on paper, you might make the case that the Cowboys may have been the better team. Yeah. But they weren't going to win that game. Nope. And the Eagles won what I still consider the most lopsided 20-7 doesn't reflect how that game went. That was the most one-sided 27 game I've ever seen.
Agreed. All right. I want to take it a little bit further and fast forward it a little bit. At what point, Ray, do you make the decision, or do you maybe see the writing on the wall, or was the offer too good to turn down, or whatever the case may be? You make the move from print to NFL Films. How hard was that for you? How much thought went into it? And really, what was your reasoning behind doing that?
Well, there was another move that preceded that, was the move from the Philadelphia Bulletin to the Philadelphia Daily News, right? Which was, that was a pretty big decision in and of itself, because the Bulletin had given me the opportunity to come to work sports, and they had given me the opportunity to cover the Eagles. So I had a tremendous amount of loyalty built up at the Bulletin and a lot of really good friends there. But by 1980, 81, 82, the Bulletin was clearly in financial distress. Right. And there was the real suspicion that, we might not be around a whole lot longer. So the Philadelphia Daily News came to me and offered me a job to go to the Daily News and become a columnist there. And it was hard to leave the Bulletin, but I recognized things are pretty precarious here. Yeah. The Daily News is on solid footing. I think I got to do this for the sake of my family. So I did. I moved to the Daily News in July of 1980. So I was at the Daily News and having just a great time. I really enjoyed working there. It was a great newspaper. Worked with tremendous people. Stan Hochman, Bill, Tom Cushman. A lot of really John Shulian, Mark Wicker. It was I think it was the best sports staff in the country, and I was proud to be part of it. And so I was there for 16 years. Wow. But in 1996, Steve Sable, who was running NFL Films, who I had known on a friendship basis for many, many years, came to me and was putting together a film project called Football America. And he wanted to hire me to be kind of a researcher, contributor. Not, I was still going to continue working at the paper, but on the side, I was going to help them get this Football America project pulled together.
Hold that thought, Ray, because I want to get a timeout because I want to get this transition, because this was there were a lot of steps along the way, and this is one of the more interesting ones that you made. So hang on to that thought. We're going to get a quick timeout. We'll come back. You're watching the Rob Ellis Show with the one and only Ray Didinger on A2D Radio. Right back.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
All right, we are back. Rob Ellis Show, Ray Didinger, our first guest. This is the one out of the chute. All right, Ray, so we just kept everybody hanging in suspense right there. So Steve Sable reaches out to you. You're at the Daily News. You're having a great run there. It wasn't a situation where you were concerned about employment or any of that. But he reaches out and you thought initially, all right, I'll do some stuff for them on the side, but I'll also keep my regular gig here. Right. So pick it up from there.
Yeah, that's exactly how it goes. I mean, the idea was that they had this idea to make a movie called Football America. And it was going to be a big 90-minute special about football everywhere except the NFL. Steve's vision of it was to tell the story of America through the game of football. So tell a whole bunch of individual football stories in different parts of the country. It was a great idea, but he said, we don't have anybody here in-house. We're all into pro football. I need somebody that can go out and find those stories for us. So he said, could you do that? And I said, yeah, no problem. So he gave me like a month to just work the phones. And so I came back with, like 60, 70 story ideas that were going to play out over the next season. And I sat with Steve and we worked through them and we narrowed it down to about a dozen that he felt was going to be the guts of Football America. And so, at that point, that was supposed to be the end of my involvement. But, at that point, I'm pretty invested in these stories. So I said to Steve, is there some way, maybe I could just stay involved? He said, absolutely. You want to, as much time as you can, you want to go out on any of these shoots with our crews. You want to help out with some of the interviews. I'd love to have you write the script. I said, that's a deal. I'll see this thing through with you. And I really thought that's what it was going to be. I was going to see Football America through to its conclusion. And then, it was going to be a great experience. And then I'd go back to full-time newspaper work. But when it was all said and done, Football America was a huge success. It won the Emmy that year as Best Sports Special of the Year.
We see those bad boys lined up behind you too, Ray. They're looking good.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
One of those is for Football America.
Yep.
And so when it ended, I had all my stuff in a box and I'm getting ready to leave NFL Films, and thanks Steve for a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And he said, how would you feel about coming and working here full time? And I said, I had never thought about that. And I said, Steve, what I did for this was different. I said, if I'm coming here as a producer, I'm going to have to learn how to make films, cut film, do a lot of stuff production wise that, the writing and the researching and the football part, I knew I could do that. Yeah. But the actual hands-on filmmaking, I've never done that. And he said, we can teach you that. He said, look, football and you know how to tell a story. The rest of it we can teach you.
Yeah.
But you got that. So I thought about it. I mean, I was 50 years old. As I said to you before, I really enjoyed newspapering. It's not like I was restless and I wanted to change.
Right.
But, how often do you have Steve Sable offering you a job at NFL Films?
Right.
It's just one of those things you can't say no to. And so, I'm taking a real chance here. I mean, this could be a real crash and burn, but, this is just too good to say no to. So I said to Steve, okay. So I went to work at NFL Films and I wound up working there for 13 years and had it was the one chapter of my life that that was unexpected. A lot of the other stuff I kind of thought that this might happen, or I kind of felt I had prepared for this. This was the one thing that just came out of left field. But it turned out to be a fantastic 13 years. And working with Steve Sable was really one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's amazing. What a legend. What a legend he and his father Ed. There's no question. So along the way, Ray, while you're at Films, Comcast Sportsnet starts up.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Stathakis, who actually hired both of us there years ago, and his cohorts have the idea to do an Eagles post-game show.
Right. Even
though the games aren't on the network. At that time, it was like, wait, you're having a post-game show and the game's not even on your air? It didn't happen. Like, people think of it now, it's nothing. But back then, we're talking 25 years ago, it was revolutionary in a lot of ways. And I'm sure it was met with some skepticism, maybe from you as well. That was another move that you make that was sort of ahead of its time. But I mean, again, was this just one of those things your gut told you to go with it? And did you think it would become the behemoth that it's become now?
Oh, no. Quite the opposite. You mentioned Tom Stathakis, who was the first program director that they brought in to kind of build the thing from the ground up. I had actually worked with Tom before, like about, I guess, 10 years earlier. Tommy was working at that time at Channel 3 in Philadelphia as the sports producer, working with Lou Tilley. Mm-hmm. And the newspapers went on strike that year. It was 1984. Mm-hmm. The newspapers went on strike. And we all thought that the paper, we'll be out a few days. Yeah. No big deal. Well, we were out for 2 months. Yeah. And so what happened was all the local TV stations, they began bringing the striking newspaper people and putting them on camera and basically doing whatever column you would have written for the paper, just come do it on TV. Mm-hmm. So Tommy was working at Channel 3, and Channel 3 reached out to me and brought me in to do that stuff during the strike. So during those 2 months when I was doing some TV during the strike, I got to meet Tom Stathakis. And then years down the road, when Comcast Sportsnet is launched, and they hired Tom to be the head of their startup, he reached out to me and said, "How would you like to be part of our team when we get the show in the air? We're going to do this Eagles post-game show." And my reaction was the same as yours. It was, well, wait a minute, the game's not on your air. We're going to do a post-game show but you're not going to show the game. Yeah, no, we're not going to show the game. And and the rules of the NFL are such that we can't show video. And but we're just going to it's going to be Michael Barkan, you, and Tom Brookshire. And you're just going to have you at a desk and you're going to talk about the game. I said, wait a minute. There's no game. There's no video. It's just 3 guys at a desk. I mean, who's going to watch that? I said, look, I'll do it. Yeah. It sounds like fun. And I know Michael and I know Brookie. Yeah. It sounds like fun. I said, but Tommy, there's no way this is going to work. All right. And he said, look, I think in most towns it probably wouldn't work. He said, but in Philly, he said, the people here, they can't get enough of the Eagles. They'll just consume anything we put out there. Yeah. Let's just try it and we'll have some fun. Okay. So we put Eagles postgame live on, and then the station was launched like in October. So the season was already underway. Right. But it was great. Immediately. Yeah. It clicked right away. People got in the habit of switching when the game was over, switching over to Comcast. The show was really good. Michael was tremendous at what he did. He's a great host. Brookie is, an icon in this town, football wise. And then I was just on there having a good time. And then within a couple of weeks, the then Mayor Rendell joined us, mm-hmm. and we were off and running. Yeah, and it was fascinating. So, Ray, along the way, while you're doing everything else that we're discussing, you also author a lot of books along the way, including one of my, all-time favorites right here. Okay. This is the Eagles Encyclopedia, the Champions Edition. Okay. Which kind of speaks for itself. And by the way, I've told you this a million times, unbelievable cover. That to me encapsulates Philadelphia so well, this cover right here. In fact, that book, when I taught at Temple, I was an adjunct professor for the history of sport in Philadelphia. That was our textbook.
Like that's the stuff I would have dreamed of when I was at Temple. That was my textbook.
Sure, me too.
Man, that's a whole nother story. But
I might have actually passed that course.
it's me too. So for people who may not know, how many books have you authored?
12.
Wow.
12. And currently there's going to be another one coming out in July. That'll be 13. And it's a paperback version of the book that I did some years ago called One Last Read, which is a collection of my favorite written stories from over the years.
Okay.
With the add-on of I wrote an afterword for this new edition, which will talk about my decision to retire, my retirement, and kind of what's happened in Philadelphia sports over the last 12 months.
Okay. I want to get to that in a second, but I also want to mention Tommy and Me, which is your play. Part of your childhood, a big part of your childhood, was when you had your family vacations in the summertime with your mom or dad. Some people might go down the shore. Some people might go to Disneyland. All right. The Didingers went to Hershey, Pennsylvania and watched Eagles training camp. And that's what you guys did as a family, you and your mom and dad. And along the way, you made you developed a great bond with your favorite player, who was Tommy McDonald. And years later, you turned that into a play, which, by the way, is, and you tell us, Ray, set it up here. Here it is on a tee. I know we have another rendition of it starting up very soon, correct?
Correct. We open this Friday. Oh, Friday's a preview. Saturday is the formal opening night.
Okay.
Of Tommy and Me, and it will be at the beautiful Bucks County Playhouse up in New Hope. And we open this weekend, and we run for a full month. The play is going to be from May 19th through June 17th. It's going to be this is the longest run we've ever had. And I know a lot of folks have come out and seen Tommy and Me over the years because we debuted it in 2016.
Right.
So it's been running now for 7 years. But this, if you have seen it before, understand this is a whole new version of it. Bucks County Playhouse, we performed it there last year. It went very well. The people that run Bucks County Playhouse liked it a lot and said, would like to bring this back, but maybe do our own production of it.
Yeah.
So that's what they did. I mean, they asked me to come back this year, and they hired a different director. They hired their own director, a fellow named Nick Corley from New York. And they hired 4 new actors and also from New York, some of them TV people. Gordon Clapp, who people remember very well from NYPD Blue. He's playing Tommy McDonald. A fellow named Carl Kensler, who's a longtime Broadway actor that's done Merrily We Roll Along, 12 Angry Men, a bunch of stuff. He's going to be me. And it's a different cast, different director, different set design. It's going to look different. It's going to sound different, but it's the same basic play. So we open this Friday, and we're going to run for a full month. And if folks want to come up to New Hope and see the play, even if you've seen it before, you haven't seen it quite this way. And I've been into several of the rehearsals, and the cast is they're killing it. They really are. It turns out that Gordon Clapp, even though he's not from here, he's actually from New Hampshire. When he was a kid, Tommy McDonald was his favorite player because he was a little guy for the same reasons that I loved him, that he was the littlest guy on the field, but played with such great energy. Gordon Clapp was a Tommy McDonald fan. So when they mailed him the script, he read it and like in 20 minutes called them back and said, I'm in.
Wow.
So the fact that we got an actor like that who's won an Emmy Award for NYPD Blue, he won a Tony Award for Glenn Ross for his work on Broadway. The fact that we got that guy to come down here and sort of be the centerpiece of the show was very exciting to me. And I've really enjoyed the last few weeks getting to know him.
Most gratifying for you. You've seen your work in print with newspapers. TV, you've done that. We see the Emmys behind you. Books, playwright, seeing your words, seeing someone playing you. I mean, you just casually threw that out there, that actor that's playing you. What for you is most, if you could just step back for a minute and be like, I'm pinching myself. I can't believe this. Is there one, or are they all kind of on equal footing?
they're all kind of here. I
Yeah.
mean, they're all every single thing that you mentioned, and in so many ways, my life has exceeded all my expectations. I mean, from what I started out thinking I wanted to do, from 5th grade when I actually first started about writing to where we are today, the things I've been privileged to do, it's every bit of it has exceeded what I ever could have possibly dreamed it could be.
Right.
But if I had to pick the one thing, it's my relationship with Tommy.
Yeah.
It's developed, being a 10-year-old kid with an autograph book, asking my hero for an autograph, to where we became friends, to where I began the campaign to try and get him in the Hall of Fame, to him getting in the Hall of Fame in '98, and then him asking me to be his presenter at the Hall of Fame. That journey of 40 some odd years, and having that weekend with him in Canton, and standing on that stage in front of that audience, in front of the greatest players who ever played, and delivering the speech to present your boyhood idol and giving him the thing that he wanted most in life, which was a bust in Canton. To be able to experience that, that was the highlight of a lifetime of highlights for me. And then having the opportunity to turn it into a play and have him actually come and see the play and love it as much as he did. All of that whole Tommy McDonald chapter of my life is, if I had to pick one highlight, and maybe the most gratifying aspect of that that would probably be it.
All right. So and by the way, I've seen the play, as you know, Ray, several times. I would suggest everybody go check it out. It is flat out awesome. All right. Let me just say that. This may step a little bit out of career and more into personal. A lot of us were unbelievably touched by the moment that you had with your son, David, who is a good friend of mine, after Super Bowl 52. So just to sort of set the stage here, the Eagles win. We know how incredible it was. They beat the Patriots. You're doing the post-game show with Michael Barkan, Barrett Brooks, Seth Joyner. Am I missing anybody, Ray? That's who it was in you, right? Correct? Okay.
No, the governor was there too.
I'm sorry, Governor Rendell as well. Okay. And you guys are in your perch inside of the stadium. Okay. You're doing your thing. Unbeknownst to you, your son, David, who was shooting the game for NFL Films. He was one of the cameramen, and David's an incredible photographer. Okay. But he makes his way up there, and you're kind of dug in, analyzing and, et cetera. I don't even know if you see him, but he makes his way to the set. And to Michael Barkan's credit, a lot of hosts have been like, do it off the air. We're going to wait till there's a camera print. This isn't what we do. Michael says, let's go. Get David on here. So pick it up from there, Ray.
Yeah, that's exactly how it went down. I mean, David said to me, because we knew we were going to be there, he was shooting the game for NFL Films. And actually, he's the guy that shot the Nick Foles wire. They had
Philly. It was his wire. Yeah.
That famous shot that we've all seen 1,000 times now, the conversation between Nick and Doug on the sideline. You want Philly? Yeah, let's do it. I mean, who hasn't seen that?
Yeah. That's David's camera and his mic. He's listening to that.
That's my son. That's my son's shot.
Yep.
He was shooting all of that. Mm-hmm. So when the game's over and he's finished shooting the trophy presentation and all that stuff, which he had to do,
right,
and packed up all of his gear and put it on the truck, he decided that he was going to find wherever it was that we were in that building, mm-hmm. And he was going to come and celebrate the win with me. And so he found we were on the mezzanine in a booth up there. And he came in, and I saw him standing behind the cameras. And during one of the breaks, I leaned over to Michael and I said, "Hey, Mike, when are we going to have a break here?" And he said, "Why? You need to go to the bathroom?" And I said, "No." I said, "My son's over there." I said, "Kind of want to go over and celebrate with him."
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, Michael, being the very intuitive TV animal that he is, mm-hmm. realizes, hey, man, this is going to be good television. So he just waves him on right in the middle of the show. And look who's here. Special guest David Didinger waves him on. And up to that point, I had been doing your typical post-game show. I had been doing all your notes.
Yep, there it is.
All legal tablet stuff,
Yep.
third down percentages, red zone efficiency, all that usual stuff.
Yeah.
Trying to keep the emotional part of it in check.
Which you have always done throughout your career. Yes.
Which I've always done.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, I always felt like that was my role,
Yeah.
was just kind of the guy that was very analytical and very, I was the reporter, and that's kind of what I was. I never took that press hat off. But, when David came up on the set and we had that father-son hug, like all the emotion came back. And I just teared up, started crying because it brought back all the memories of all the Sundays with my parents and my grandparents and, the whole how we felt in 1960 at Franklin Field when the Eagles beat the Packers and the first championship I ever really experienced. I experienced that with my family in 1960. And now here I was experiencing it again with my own son at Super Bowl 52. And it's just a whole lifetime of memories and emotions just came roaring back. And, just turned me into it
was special, Ray. I can tell you.
Tears and coughing, but it was great. And it's really funny. I mean, Rob, hardly a day goes by that I'm not walking the streets and somebody stop me and say, I have to tell you, and I know exactly where they're going.
Yep.
That moment with you and your son, to me, was one of the highlights of that whole Super Bowl. And I mean, it's it wasn't yesterday now; it's a few years now.
Yeah.
But I never get tired of hearing it because what I understand it better now than I did then. It was what David and I were expressing there was what was happening all over the city.
Yep.
That scene was happening in every living room from here to South Jersey, from here to the shore, from here to the Poconos. I mean, it was everywhere. I said to David later, I said, I thought I was just putting my arms around you. We were putting our arms around each other, but we were really putting our arms around all of Philadelphia. Both of us were. And I think that people, it was a really special day and it was a really special moment. And I never get tired of talking about it.
Ray, I was on the set. I was back in Philly. We tossed to you guys and then we took it back from you guys. But I had about 30 seconds in between the game ending and going on the air. I called my dad. He's crying.
Good.
I know I have to be on the air in 30 seconds and I'm trying to keep it together talking to him because he was a diehard, you and my dad.
Your dad, he was right there. I mean, he was right. Your dad reminded me very, very much of the guys in the bar, my grandfather's bar. I mean, he was right out of that West Philly, Southwest Philly culture. And that day meant the world to those guys. No question.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt. All right. So I wanted to hit you with, I love the background, the career journey, that kind of stuff. I wanted to hit you with just some present day stuff. I want to get your thoughts. So I want to circle it back to our poll and our question and our, agree to disagree. And basically, the Eagles could very well have a lesser regular season record, but still be a better team than last year. Agree or disagree? So let's talk about it, right? They lose Hargrave. They lose CJGJ. They lose a couple other pieces, certainly from the linebacking core. They're going to be counting on some unproven guys. Jalen Carter, who I think from a talent standpoint, nobody's arguing what this guy can do.
No.
You're throwing Nakobe Dean in there now. We're going to see what he's made of. You're going to get more reps for Jordan Davis. There's a new look defensive coordinator. There's a new look linebacker, secondary coach. My thought is, Ray, it could take a little while defensively. I think they hit the ground running offensively, but it could take a bit. And fans may look at that and get a little impatient. But where do your thoughts now that we have the draft over with and that kind of stuff about the 23 team?
Yeah, I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be a challenge. We talked about it earlier. I think it will be. I don't think it's going to be I don't think it's going to be easy by any means. Mm-hmm. We've had 56 teams lose a Super Bowl. And only 8 of them made it back the next year.
Wow.
And a lot of them fell way short. A lot of them didn't even make the playoffs. So there's a reason for that. It's hard. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. The schedule makes it harder. The fact that you've got the bullseye painted on you makes it harder. And also just the sifting through the emotional wreckage of losing that game and then starting over again at the next year. At the bottom, and we got to work our way back up to the top again. People don't understand how hard that is. I mean,
Yeah.
it really is. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think what the Buffalo Bills did to go back 4 straight years, even though they never won.
Right.
I mean, to make that trip 4 years in a row is remarkable. It really is. And so that's where the Eagles are right now. Now, do they have the roster to do it? Yeah, they do. You look around the NFC. I think they're still the best team.
Mm-hmm.
But you've lost both of your coordinators, which is going to require an adjustment.
Yep.
And we talked about the schedule. It's one of those real helter-skelter kind of schedules where every week's going to be different than the previous week. And then you've got that stretch coming out of the bye in mid-season where you just have a killer stretch of the next 5 games you're playing really good teams. And by then, who knows, if you've picked up a couple injuries along the way, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
I would still expect this team to win the division. I still think they're the best team in the East, even though there's the history of nobody repeating in this division since
Forever.
the Andy Reid team of 03-04. I mean, it's just a quirky kind of thing, but the division champ hasn't repeated in all of those years, in 20 years. So, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride, I think. And the fans have to understand all that. And the one thing you can't have happen is if they lose week 1 in New England, I mean, you could lose to Bill Belichick anytime. I mean, people say, the Patriots aren't what they used to.
It's not going to be an easy game. No way.
It absolutely won't be. I mean, Belichick's got the whole summer to prepare for that game. You think he's not going to have something up his sleeve? Yep. So if you go up there and everybody thinks, the Patriots, they aren't any good anymore, and you go up there and they bushwhack you, and now you're 0-1, what's the mood in the city going to be? Yeah. Is it going to be, oh my God, it's all falling apart? We're going to be another one of those fluke teams, or all they're fatheads now. Now they think they're great and they don't have to play, or I gave Jalen Hurts all that money, and now all of that's the whole mood of the city could turn really troubled and angry real quick if they don't get off to a good start. And then you got to fight your way through that the whole time. Every year the Eagles came off the Super Bowls, the previous Super Bowls, that next year was hard. After the Eagles went to the Super Bowl under Vermeil that next year, they won their first 6 games, and then the second half of the year they just hit the wall.
Yeah.
And they struggled, and they got into the playoffs, but then they got knocked out in the first round by the Giants. They got upset by the Giants at home. Mm-hmm. Coming off the Andy year, that next year was a disaster. They went 6-10, didn't even make the playoffs.
TO implosion. Yeah.
Yeah. And then coming off the Super Bowl win,
yeah,
they got back to the playoffs, but that year was a very troubled year. I mean, they had to win a couple games at the end just to get in. Wentz was up and down. There was the whole issue about the Foles, who should be the quarterback. I mean, that was a really tough, hard climb, even though they got back to the playoffs. They win the game, and they win one game, and then they get beat in New Orleans. So I don't expect this to be easy, but I think the team is good enough, and that I think that I certainly think they're going to win the division and get to the playoffs. Yeah. But I think it's going to be a year with a few bumps in the road, and I think the fans have to be prepared for that.
All right, I want to jump, and we appreciate you giving us this much time, Ray. So I just want to hit a couple other sports before we get out of here. The Flyers make some pretty interesting moves. It's the first time I've been able to say that in a while, where the word interest in Flyers haven't been used in the same sentence in a while.
Right.
But they lift the interim tag from Danny Briere. He is the general manager. But the one that was sort of the whoa was Keith Jones. Keith Jones goes from the broadcast booth to the director of hockey operations. We all know Jonesy. You know Jonesy very well from his years as a player and as a media member. He was not only the Flyers analyst for their broadcast, but he also did hockey nationally, both in the studio and, when it came to play-by-play analytical work. That's what I think distinguishes him, Ray, from sort of the same old, oh, here we go again, another Flyer, et cetera.
Right.
The ability that he's had over the last 20 plus years to talk to everybody in the sport, to pick the brain of everybody in the sport. I give the Flyers credit in that it was unique. It's a good PR move, but I think it was more than just a PR move. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I I will admit to a certain bias because I've known Jonesy a long time and I really like him. But no, I think I know I've heard the same thing. Oh my God, to bring him another old Flyer, they're stuck in it. No, this is not the same thing. I mean, Jonesy, because of the nature of the work that he's done and being a national broadcaster and doing national games, I mean, he sees beyond the Flyer family, but yet he is still part of the Flyer family. So I kind of see him as kind of representing the best of both worlds. Like, he's seen the whole league. He knows the direction of the league. He understands the international scouting and the makeup of the league as a whole. He sees the big picture, but he also has his roots in the Philadelphia Flyers organization, and he understands what this team was and what the work ethic of this team was, and that's what we want to get back to. But he's not locked into that Wells Fargo Center is his whole view of the world.
Yeah.
He's got the wider view, but he also understands what Flyers hockey was when it was good. So yeah, I think and he's also a really smart guy. I mean, for people who used to listen to him as kind of the jokester on the morning show, don't really understand how smart a guy he is. I was surprised. I remember, my son David, who we've talked about, he's a cameraman who shoots a lot of the Flyers games, right. And he and Jonesy have become good friends over the years. And a couple of weeks ago, after they were changing up the organization and they were interviewing different people for this job, he said that he saw Jonesy down at Wells Fargo, and he said, would you have any interest in them talking to you or interviewing for this job? And Jonesy said, no, I don't want to work for a living. I'm happy doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Which is why, and he told me that story, we both laughed because that was a very Jonesy way of answering the question. Mm-hmm. So that's why I was even more surprised when the news came out that he was the guy. But by the same token, I urge the fans to give this thing a chance because right. As smart as he is, just getting up all those mornings after doing Flyers post game to be in the WIP studio at 5 a.m. He has this is the guy that knows about hard work.
Yeah.
Hard work is what got him to the NHL as a player. So that combined with what I think is a pretty active native intelligence, I think the Flyers may be onto something with Keith Jones.
I would agree with you. All right, we're going to do our no huddle, Ray. This is rapid fire fast, and we're going to get you out of here because we appreciate all your time. All right. Okay. Favorite all-time band?
Favorite all-time
band?
Band?
Yeah, music group.
The band.
The band. Okay, Robbie Robertson. It's
the band. Okay. Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm, those guys.
All right, good choice. Favorite all-time TV show?
Law and Order, the original.
Okay. Jack McCoy. Yes.
I still watch the reruns every night.
Why no cell phone?
I just don't like that feeling. I just don't like the feeling of, if I had a cell phone with me, I would feel like I never left the office. I just kind of need to be off on my own and just feeling like I'm connected to that big bad world out there. I just don't like it. I just need my freedom.
All right, we know you had a little bit of a rocky start with Dick Vermeil, but you guys got along well. Player that you hit a couple bumps with over your career?
Probably Larry Boa.
Okay.
Probably Larry Boa. When I was back when I was at the Bulletin in the 70s, writing a lot of baseball because the Phillies were a postseason team pretty much every year. And everybody knows Larry. Larry's a pretty fiery guy.
Yeah.
With a short fuse. And if you wrote a piece that was critical of the Phillies or wrote anything that was critical, Larry was a guy that would tell you exactly what he thought about it. So he and I butted heads numerous times in the clubhouse. And in fact, one time we were like nose to nose, and it was like we were getting ready to punch each other. And so that would probably be it. Although, again, like the Dick Vermeil thing, over time it worked its way out, and now Larry and I are good friends. But he was a very high-strung guy, incredibly competitive. A guy that worked his butt off to get to the major leagues, which I respected. But he was always a guy that had a real temper and a real short fuse. One of the things that made him a great player, but it made him a tough guy to cover.
Other than Tommy McDonald, player you enjoyed covering the most? Guy who was funny. It doesn't necessarily mean he had to be the greatest player ever, but a guy you really enjoyed covering.
Bobby Clark.
Okay.
Bobby Clark. I never saw in my 50 years of covering sports, I never saw a guy that played as hard night after night or gave as much of himself as Bobby Clark did. I thought that he was the most extraordinary competitor and the greatest leader I've ever seen in sports.
Okay. Last question. Knowing what you know about the media landscape now, the way the business has changed, evolved, devolved, however you want to put it, would you still choose the same career path?
No, 100%. 100%. Part of it is the biggest reason is because I love it.
Yeah.
And I've loved doing it. 53 years I did this. I'm now pretty much retired. I think it's fair to say.
I get the questions all the time. Is Ray going to be back next football season?
No, I will not be. I actually fully retired a year ago with full intention of retiring. And then the Eagles season, the way it evolved, sort of changed all that. So I came back for the postseason.
Yep.
But now I'm retiring. I mean, my wife and I are going to travel this fall. We're going to go spend. We're going to take a cruise. We're going to spend some time in Italy. I'm really kind of unplugging.
I got you.
But I had a phenomenal, just beyond phenomenal 50 years doing this, and there's nothing I would have rather done. And the other part of it, Rob, is there's nothing else I can do. I'm not good at anything else. I mean, it's, I can't. I'm not.
Same here.
I'm not handy. I can't fix things around.
Same.
I'm not a do-it-yourself guy. I'm not a golfer. I'm there. I can do very, very few things except what I've been doing for 50 years. So this was kind of what I think I was meant to do, and I feel really blessed that I was able to do it for as long as I did.
All right, perfect way to go out. Okay, remind everybody again, Ray, about Tommy and Me, where it is, how you get tickets, when everything gets started.
Yes, please do. The all-new version of Tommy and Me, new director, new cast. We're going to be at the Bucks County Playhouse, which is a great place. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's right on the river up in New Hope. It's just beautiful. And we open this Friday, May 19th, and the play will run through June 17th. And if you're interested in coming up and seeing it, Gordon Clapp from NYPD Blue is going to be Tommy McDonald. Either contact, go to the website, the Bucks County Playhouse website, and you can order your tickets. And I hope to see you all out there.
Perfect. Ray, listen, I couldn't have asked for a better person to kick this thing off with. You gave us way more time than you had to. We really do appreciate you hopping on for this first one. Ray, thank you very much, sir.
Hey, it was a pleasure, Rob. Always a pleasure spending time with you, and always a pleasure talking Philly sports, because you and I have spent a lifetime there.
Yes, we have. All right, so that will do us. And that's the great Ray Didinger. That'll do it for our very first episode of the Rob Ellis Show here on the A2D radio platform family. We do appreciate it, everybody. We will see you next week. Ray, thank you. Everybody, thanks for hanging out. Everybody in the chat section, everybody who was involved, we do appreciate it. And we will talk to you soon.